The personal part of this story was told to me by my friend's older brother, Jay, and his mom. The rest is common knowledge around my hometown. When Jay was about 10 years old, in 1992, an ice cream truck started driving around town. It was in the middle of summer. The truck stopped at all the lakes and parks in our town, and nobody thought much of it, 'cause our town is small and rural, and of course we have an ice cream truck. Being 10, Jay was excited whenever he heard the ice cream truck drive around. That is, he was excited until he actually convinced his mom to give him some money and let him buy an ice cream. He sprinted to the truck, which stopped a block from his house, but he got a very funny feeling from the guy. He is 1/4 Native American, his mom is half, and is an actual medicine woman, and the whole family believes heavily in trusting their intuitions. So Jay backs away and goes home, even though there was a group of 3 or 4 boys at the truck already. He told his mom about his inexplicable feeling of unease when he saw the man, and his mom told him to stay away if the man didn't feel right. A couple weeks later, 2 boys went missing while they were out at a park. Their moms had turned their backs for less than a minute. At first, it was assumed that they went exploring to the nearby creek looking for salamanders, but after hours of searching, it came out that the last vehicle seen in the area was the ice cream truck. Then the truck stopped showing up for a few days. Cue the police asking the town officials about the ice cream man. It turns out that nobody knew the guy. He didn't fill out paperwork, or get a license, or whatever it is you have to do to drive your child bait through town. Nobody had thought anything of it, 'cause this guy just showed up and seamlessly started driving his route one day. I guess he had scouted the locale beforehand in another car, or on foot, and picked out all the areas with kids. The driver, being a sick fuck, couldn't contain himself for long, and started driving his truck around the shittiest of my town's 7 trailer parks a week after the boys went missing. This trailer park is literally on the wrong side of the tracks, with a railroad running right down the side, and our town dump is just a little farther down the street. It's at the very edge of town, with nothing else around it but empty woods. I forgot to mention, my town is in rural Michigan, so this trailer park was about a mile deep into the woods, and it was creepy as fuck, even without a pedo on the loose. So the cops were called, and were told that the guy was living in this trailer park. They found his truck with a tarp haphazardly thrown over it, and burst into the nearby trailer and arrested him. Since this is where the local legend starts taking over, I don't really know what they found inside the trailer. I have heard that the trailer was full of memorabilia from past children, and I have heard it was just a shitty trailer that looked like a hobo with a roofing plastic fetish had lived there. I do know that the guy ended up confessing after police found some evidence in his trailer, telling the police that he had kidnapped, raped, and murdered the 2 boys, finally dropping their bodies at the dump down the street. It was the grisliest thing to happen in my town's history, and a few years later when I was growing up, things were much more strict. There are cameras at all the parks now, an organized neighborhood watch program, and a see something, say something law was enacted. Once smartphones became popular, I downloaded the sex offender database app and set it to my hometown. Holy shit, my hometown is sex offender central. There are a dozen sex offenders living in the downtown area, maybe 10 blocks by 10 blocks, and over 3 dozen within the boundaries of my school district. Hell, one lived less than a mile away from me, on some dark, wooded dirt road. I have gone running in the middle of the night down that road, more times than I can count.
Let me just preface this with the fact that this was the one time my parents let me stay home unsupervised for an extra day without a much older babysitter. And so begins my story. It all started one hot, boring afternoon in the suburbs. I was spending one day with some of the neighborhood kids while our parents were at work. Although I was only 10 years old, my parents let me spend the day with the two girls that lived across the street, because the oldest of the two sisters was 13. The other, my best friend Sarah at the time, was 9 years old. We were laying out on the trampoline, playing the "What do you want to do?" "I don't know, what do you want to do?" game. Then we heard that exciting little jingle in the distance. The ice cream man. We all started scrambling out the door after the older sister Tammy, who had the money. We rushed down the street to the waiting ice cream man, joining the group of boys who were outside playing lacrosse at the time. And as soon as we walked up and saw the driver, I got an eerie feeling. Something just seemed off about him. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid, considering he had a massively wretched scar down the side of his face. But he didn't stop smiling. It was a sinister type smile, coupled with an unrelenting gaze fixed right on us. We quickly bought our ice cream and bubble gum and left. As we were walking back towards our cul-de-sac, Bossy Tammy ordered us to stop and sit on our neighbor's driveway and eat our ice cream. She said,
"Look, I've heard a few stories on the news of these guys stealing kids. So let's just sit here on Miss Day's driveway until he drives away."
Up until this point, Tammy had a history of telling us bogus stories to try and scare us, so Sarah started whining. On any other day, I would have agreed with her, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. The ice cream truck then continued towards us, driving incredibly slow, around our cul-de-sac. He was still smiling, and his eyes were still trained on the three of us. When he passed us, he even winked. As soon as he disappeared around the corner, we made a mad dash for Tammy and Sarah's house. We locked the doors, and then fled to her parents' bedroom. A few minutes go by, and we had all calmed down a bit, and had settled onto our parents' bed to watch some terrible daytime TV, like Jerry Springer or something. At that point, out of her parents' window, that faces in towards the cul-de-sac on the second floor, we saw the ice cream truck stopped outside of Miss Day's house. We didn't know how long he had been there, considering he didn't have the jingle playing. He wasn't parked there very long, and he eventually slowly drove away. By this time, we were all hyperventilating, but before we could take a minute to recover, he drove by a third time. This time, however, we saw him get out of the truck in front of Miss Day's house, and walked up towards the front door, examining the outside of the house. He had a pad of paper out, and began to jot some things down. We all started panicking at this point, as Tammy yelled out,
"He's writing down the address."
He returned to the ice cream wagon, and he started the truck, and as he started to turn the truck around, he looked up, and saw us in the window. We hit the floor, like we were under fire, and watched him out of a side window. He stopped the truck right in front of Tammy and Sarah's house, and jotted more down on his pad of paper. As soon as he drove away that time, we saw our neighbor arrive home from work. In a complete frenzy, we ran over to her, knowing she worked at the police station, and told her what had happened. Ultimately, they had found the guy, along with a notepad of descriptions of each one of us, the addresses of Miss Day's house, and of Tammy and Sarah's house, as well as plans for when he was going to come back for us. The guy was a registered child sex offender, with a warrant out for his arrest. I'm not sure how he got in that position to be selling ice cream to children in the first place, but he was. So now every time I hear the ice cream wagon jingle, I feel nauseous and unnerved.
When I was little, I spent a lot of time at the park. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and she would take me and my friends there almost every day during the summer, and if we were lucky, she would buy each of us something from the ice cream truck. It was one of those lucky days when this story takes place. I was 6 or 7, and my mom had taken me and 3 other girls from the neighborhood to play at the park. It was sunny and warm, and pretty much one of those absolutely idyllic days you see in the movies. Everyone was in a good mood, my mom included, when we heard the ice cream truck approaching. She gave us all some money to buy some treats, opting to hang back and chat with a friend. After all, we weren't leaving her sight, so nothing bad could happen. The ice cream truck wasn't the one we usually saw, but it wasn't unheard of. There was quite a few that drove around town, and they would all compete to hit the park crowd. This one looked kind of run down, but when you're 7, it doesn't matter. Ice cream is ice cream. My friends and I raced to get in line, and were delighted to be the first ones there. The ice cream man seemed just as excited to see us.
"I have a special treat for you girls today,"
he told us as we handed him our money, silencing our request for the usual favorites. We were all skeptical, but he kept insisting that his special treat was much yummier than any ice cream we've ever had before. So we all shrugged and agreed. Like I said, ice cream is ice cream. The man disappeared back into the truck for a few minutes, and we could hear him giggling. Now I would find it creepy, but at the time, I thought it was just funny. A few minutes later, he handed us what looked like ordinary ice cream sundaes.
"I promise, they're extra good. Don't waste any,"
he told us with a wink. As we started walking back to my mom, the ice cream truck left quickly. That's when I remember thinking something was off, because the trucks would usually stay around much longer, getting as much business from all the kids as they possibly could. But that didn't stop me from eating the ice cream though. But when I was eating it, I noticed that something tasted off. Soon my friends were all complaining about how our ice cream tasted funny. My mom also noticed how quickly that truck left, so she insisted on tasting mine, just to be safe. I'll never forget how quickly she marched us out of the park that day, or how horrified she looked. At the time, I didn't understand why she was so upset, until years later, she told me the ice cream had tasted like semen. The ice cream truck guy had masturbated into our sundaes. Horror Story Part 2. Realizing your mother recognizes the taste of semen. The police questioned my friends and I about the man in the truck, but none of us were able to give a good description. I think they must have tested the DNA in the ice cream, but I really don't remember much from the whole investigation because my mom shielded me from it. I do know, however, that they never caught the guy.
I grew up in a suburb of Philadelphia, in a very nice town, with a lot of great people in it. However, it's in a bit of a bubble, meaning that the town and areas surrounding it are not the nicest places. Crimes, drugs, homeless people, the usual. My town never had much of a problem with these things, but once in a while, someone would come over and cause some trouble. This is a story of one of those times. I was 10 at the time, and my father and I had a habit of going for ice cream after my karate lessons. The ice cream shop we went to was a small outdoor stand right next to the gym. Yeah, great place, I know. It was a quiet, local place that was usually pretty busy, but since my karate lessons didn't end until 9 p.m., the time the shop closed, we were usually the only ones there at that point. It was owned and run by an Irishman named Mr. Murphy, who knew us by name and was always very outgoing and friendly. I should also mention that the gym and the ice cream stand were located in a large strip mall with quite a large parking lot, which was notoriously frustrating to get out of, as it had 2 one-way entrances, but only 1 exit. One day, I had stayed at karate for an extra hour because my father had to work late and couldn't get me until 10. Luckily, the gym was open late, and my karate instructor stayed with me until my father arrived. The rest of the parking lot was fairly empty, as most of the stores were closed. When my father finally came, we walked over to the ice cream stand, thinking that it was probably closed. But to our surprise, the metal screen was only halfway closed, and there was a light on inside. We figured Mr. Murphy was still there, and since he knew us, he might be willing to serve us late. My dad knocked on the counter and asked if anyone was there. No one answered, but we heard some rustling around, like someone had suddenly moved and knocked something over. My dad knocked again. This time, silence. We were about to turn and leave when suddenly the metal screen opened up. Inside the stand was not the friendly ice cream man I had known, but a tall, skinny, heavily bearded man wearing a windbreaker that was at least 3 sizes too small. I couldn't see what he had on below his waist, but he wasn't wearing a shirt, and he smelled like my dog after rolling around in the mud all day. He had a very creepy grin on his face, showing a crooked row of yellow nicotine-stained teeth. His hair looked like it was falling out. His eyes were squinting, as if he couldn't see us clearly. He stared at us for a while, then cocked his head and started to speak.
You buy ice cream? You buy ice cream?
That voice. I can still remember that voice perfectly. I'm not going to say it sounded inhuman or devilish or unnatural, because that's simply not the best way to describe it. It was disturbed. It was delirious. It was a bit insane. And his smile after he said it, he tilted his head down a bit so I could see the top of his balding hair. As his grin grew wide, from cheek to cheek, my dad instantly grabbed me and turned me away. He shouted at the man, "Who are you? Where's the owner?"
You buy ice cream?
How did you get into the stand?
You buy ice cream?
I'm calling the police. It was at this point that the man placed something on the counter. He held it in his fist, so I couldn't see it at first, until he opened his palm and held it out to us. It was a small knife, probably one used to cut fishing wire and such. Small, but sharp. My dad had had enough at this point. He picked me up and threw me in the car. He came inside and locked the doors as he took out his cell phone to call the police. Meanwhile, though I was as scared as I had ever been in my life, I turned back to look at the stand. The man was not in the window anymore, but outside the stand, walking slowly towards our car. Not only that, but he had the small knife clenched in his fist. I was choked with fear and couldn't speak, but I did reach over and shake my dad's leg. My dad looked out the window, saw the man approaching, and immediately turned on the car and sped off. I mentioned how there is only one exit to the parking lot. One of the reasons it's so annoying is that it exits onto a busy street with a light, and even at 10 p.m., it can be annoying. It can be difficult to get out immediately. We went through the exit lane, but had to stop at the end since there was a light and cars were speeding across from us. Even though we were stuck for a minute, my dad looked behind us and told me he didn't see the man anymore. I was starting to feel a little bit better, until we felt something thud against our trunk. We turned around, and there he was.
You want ice cream?
His grin had turned into an angry snarl, and his eyes were open wider.
You want ice cream?
I screamed, as my dad decided to floor it into the oncoming traffic. Luckily, we didn't cause an accident, but my dad raced home at about twice the speed limit. Over the next few days, it was all pieced together. This man had apparently broken into the ice cream stand after the owner had left and was sleeping in there. The door was locked, but he was able to pick it. They got some fingerprints off the door and inside the stand and were able to ID him. He had a pretty long police record, but no other documents of residence, ID, even birth. There was a current warrant out on him for aggravated assault and attempted rape. My dad went and gave an official statement of the incident to the police, but after that, everything just pretty much went back to normal, as they usually do in these stories. I don't know if they ever actually caught the guy, and as far as I know, no one else in our town ran into him. The man became almost a figment of my imagination, and if it weren't for my father retelling the story to everyone he knew, I may have even forgot about it entirely. The only mystery left in the story was the ice cream stand. It never reopened after that night, and I never saw Mr. Murphy again. That's not saying much since I ever only saw him at the stand. I never asked my dad about it, since I find it awkward to talk about the incident with him, seeing as he sees it as a heroic escape story, and I see it as a memory to forget. Still, I find it odd that such a successful, ambitious man like Mr. Murphy would close down his shop for good overnight. I guess that's the disappointing part about stories like these. There's always that one unsolved detail that will bring you back to the memory you want to forget.